Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello, and welcome to Fired Up, the Startup Marketing Podcast. My name is Morgan McClintock, and it is Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving to you all. Now, we've got a treat in store for you today as a little bit of a different format. We're going to be talking about data storytelling with our very own Ian Lipner. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Morgan. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too. Now, some of you might not know Ian, and so let me just introduce him quickly. Ian has been in PR for 25 years, focusing on technology clients. He founded and ran the Washington, D.C. office of Lewis, which is where we worked together. And he helped the company launch its research division, which is totally relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. Then he joined a crisis communications agency called LEVICK, where he managed the company's emerging brands and their cybersecurity practice before he joined Firebrand. Ian is an avid fisherman, a gardener, and wine collector, and generally a fan of things that require persistence and patience, just like PR. So, no better person than to talk about data storytelling. And the topical thing here today is we have just launched a new ebook, How to Stand Out with Data, and we'll provide a link to get that in the show notes. So we really want to unpack, as a startup, data is one of the things that you've got that can help you level up into an next tier of press and drive consistent coverage. So I want to talk to Ian all about that. So Ian, let me start with a very basic question. When we talk about data storytelling, what do we mean?
This is kind of borrowed from the concept of data journalism. Reporters digging into big data sets and trying to find things that other people haven't really found yet. Journalists, though, they don't have as much time as they'd like. They don't have necessarily as many folks dedicated to that. And it's hard to find good data sets, right? But that's something that companies, especially tech companies, that's something they have are some interesting data sets. So data storytelling or data-driven storytelling is about doing the work that journalists would if they had access to that data and trying to find the interesting and sometimes even important stories that your company can tell that other people can't.
Right. What kinds of data are you talking about? Are we talking about primary research that they might do, or is there another source of data?
Well, sometimes that's the best way to find out interesting things is to simply go out and ask people. But many times companies already have those answers. You know, obviously we're in the age of data-driven marketing, right? So we know a little bit more about how people react to at least our content, if not the ideas inside them. And sometimes our companies that we represent, they have even more insight than that, right? If they're a fintech company, they have insights into transactions. If they are, a traffic company, they know, how automobiles are moving. Mm-hmm. There's something that each company might know from their own work. The other thing that they might know about is the affinities and priorities of their customer sets. And in doing so, it might be appropriate for them to become an expert about some of those topics, even if they aren't the topics that are about their products and services.
So the concept here is looking at your operation, the work that you do. What is the sort of exhaustive data that comes from that could give you an insight into trends or something topical that you could then analyzed. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. Knowing about your market, knowing about the problems that your market, that your product or services seek to solve, that in itself might have a lot of knowledge that you can share that isn't necessarily productized.
Right. We've got metadata from our operations. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get hold of that, right? So it does require a bit of an engineering lift. But assuming I can get it, what do I do with it? How's a journalist going to use that information?
Yeah, you don't want to just kind of create some giant, sack of data, right? Where you don't know where to grab hold of it, right? You gotta kind of pack it into nice little suitcases with neat handles on them, right? And those have to be for each audience, and and the journalists that are trying to reach those. So when you think about your data sets, you have to think about how will this become useful to the audiences in the end? Like, what insights do we have that could help them do business better, or operate teams better, or find opportunities? Among those things, how can we bring those things forward in a way that a journalist can present it as a trend, as something that's generalizable? And when you look at the data or the data sets that you're exploring, it's all about how can this be made actionable for, both the end user, that might care about the industry or the trend you're talking about, and by the journalists themselves, so that they can present that.
Right. So this is very common in, say, sectors like cybersecurity, where cybersecurity companies will put out a report, the state of whatever area that they're involved with. And so that requires getting the data. How many incidents have there been? Maybe I'm looking at it by geography. Maybe I'm looking at it by certain types of technology, types of attack, and trying to provide some sort of trend analysis there. Do I always need to sort of package it up into a great big report? That feels like a bit of a lift. A lot of the cybersecurity companies have a specific lab looking at that. Do I really need to go that far?
Not always. If there's the resources that you can go that far, there's lots of good arguments to be made on why that's worthwhile. But sometimes it's about being quickest to an insight, or bringing something that really illustrates the news of the day. A lot of times when people think about data storytelling, they're thinking about a giant lift and, a long runway until there's a result, but it doesn't have to be that way. However, moving quickly isn't a trick that every company can do. Startups can be particularly good at it because of the fewer layers, because of the more direct effect on their marketing. They're more willing to move quickly. And so that could be an excellent tactic for companies that are scaling up.
Right. So this could literally be, hey, this incident, like keeping with our cybersecurity example, there has been this kind of vulnerability, and within our data quite quickly, have we seen it? How many is it being successful? Where is it being successful? When did it start? When did it stop? Which country is it coming from? Which you would then use as a pitch, data for a pitch for a reporter to flesh out their story. So you don't need to have the full report, as long as you can sacrifice the depth, as long as you can compensate with it with some speed.
Absolutely. I mean, cybersecurity, as an example, is an area where you really do need some intel to stand out. When you're talking about things that are, let's say, broader in nature, let's say it's a new stat about Taylor Swift, right? You have to go a little bit beyond being fast. You have to be clever as well, right? Like, that's the trade-off. The broader audience that your data appeals to, it can be a great asset, but also, it's got to be clever to get through the media's filter.
Right. And I guess also you could just look at the calendar. If to see what's coming up, Cyber Monday, we're going to see, the uplift in online retail sales there. Reporters are going to want to cover that. That's coming. Which sites got crushed? If you are a load balancing company, you'll have that data in terms of how much extra traffic sites got, and you might be able to shed some light on which ones went down. You can see that coming in advance. So you could be quick, but you could also be prepared if your organization has needs a little bit more run up, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, so you can have this report, you can have this quick pitch. I guess maybe you can always package it into an infographic or some other kind of, might feel a little bit more like marketing material, but maybe there are some other formats you can use. What have you seen?
What we're seeing now is that journalists, even though not all of them have the resources to create their own visuals, they tend to want to try to anyway. They don't necessarily accept that like ready-made infographic. The infographic, though, however, still remains very useful on social. It's still a place where it can proliferate quickly. A good graphic is a great way to get some brand attention if you have some interesting things to tell stories about. You also see folks bringing this into their thought leadership program, and I think that's a tactic that is important, especially now. You've got a lot of sameness among brands. Something that you can be doing is deciding that there's a topic around which you want to educate or that you want to delve more deeply. And then you can bring that not just to the kinds of byline articles and things that you would normally expect, but to even places like podcasts, and have a reason that your executive should be selected as we all are pitching those through. When you have the ability to repeat your data storytelling over time, right? Such as like when you do an industry report, or when you do an annual breakdown, or even just delve into a particular topic on a frequent basis, you can start delivering your results in different formats, like small portals or in regular templates that your journalist friends will come to expect. Like, okay, here it's going to have the growth numbers at the top. There's going to be some bullet points below that. Here's where I need to go for details. When you kind of package up your stats and your insights in ways that journalists can quickly derive, the things that they need to write their stories, it's just as effective as a giant report where they have to comb through it on their own, where there might be a lot of meat there, but they got to kind of do their own spelunking.
Yeah, and so I think that repeatable part is really important. Like the first one, okay, I've got a single data, I snap a point in time. It might be interesting, but there's no direction to it. It's really, and plus reporters are coming, if you're doing it for PR purposes, people are coming to it cold. You're not the SME on this topic. You have to build that credibility up. But the second time, you start to have a bit more, you've got more to say, because here's quarter on quarter or year on year or whatever the time frame is, and you can compare and contrast those things. So it's just a bit more illustrative. I guess the first one you can use in proactive pitches as well, and in the inbound media inquiries might come over from Quoted or what have you, just to sort of add a little bit more context and make you stand out in addition. So I do think you can get some good value out of that first one, but the repeatable data program is where the real value is. And so if I want to start that data storytelling program, what's the first step that I take?
You got to look at what your assets are that you have. Maybe it's you do have something in your platform. For example, if you're a fintech company and you have transaction data, you got to take a look at what can I share that isn't going to give away sort of something proprietary. It's certainly never customer or information or anything like that. But then you got to kind of look at, to what extent is looking at this data on a frequent basis going to provide more insight than just looking at it once, right? If it's a view into human nature, probably not going to change from year to year, right? But views into plans, into recently changed behaviors, views into, like we said, transactional data, that's obviously going to be something that's very dynamic. Those kinds of things can give you confidence to start charting, right? One data point is just a data point. 2 is still a couple, but then after a few, you've got trends, and you can start to make comparisons like year over year, and goes beyond just sort of that snapshot. And once you've got that ability, you have to make sure that you're committed to the long run and committed to the cadence, right? It can't be a quarterly report that sometimes comes out every 3 months, every 5 months, and so on and so forth, right? Committing to the duration of it means understanding that, like you said before, it's sort of a sedimentary process, right? You know, each release of data or each version of your themed research is going to kind of add a little bit more audience and add a little bit more credibility and allow you to do more things. And what we advise with many of our clients is after a couple of iterations to start layering in more dimensions to that research so that it becomes more and more interesting. Maybe you have something that is more of a snapshot of behavior at that time or what's going on in the news at that time. Once it's been demonstrated that you're going to deliver a recurring report, journalists will start to take it more and more seriously. The other thing that you see with those recurring reports is, of course, it gives your PR teams, an opportunity to reach out to journalists, and that leaves that sediment, if you will, in their email boxes. A lot of journalists, and we've heard this directly as we ask what sparked your interest in our data, they'll tell us it was from not that version of the reports pitching, but from pitches that we'd said on the previous version. Or they might say, we were doing a search through our email box because we were looking for insights related to this thing, and your research popped back up. So it's not just research on the World Wide Web. This is research within email boxes, which means you do have to take this stuff and ask people to look at it. It's not a if you build it, they will come kind of thing. You have to take it to the people who can find it useful.
Yeah. And so over time, this is an investment like any kind of content. You got to keep the cadence up, the quality up, and gradually it snowballs. And, we've even had reporters ask for these reports exclusively in advance to have a look, which is great. And so, because you're showing good credibility in there, but the cadence is important. Look, it's not a slam dunk, this though, is it? It can go wrong. And you just put up a blog post about 5 reasons they can go wrong, because you can survey people and find, for example, something just really obvious. And so, of course, everybody sort of knows that. And great, you've proven it with fresh data, but there's nothing interesting in that. What are some of the other reasons why these kinds of things can go wrong?
I think sometimes people aren't thinking about whether their question is really that interesting to anyone outside, their sort of industry circle, right? And, if the goal in advance is, hey, let's get some industry trade press within this specific industry, that's a perfectly reasonable goal, right? But a lot of folks are investing in these programs they're looking for that broader coverage. They're looking for that business coverage. So they're asking the wrong questions. They're asking about something that's too much in the weeds when they should be kind of backing out a little bit and thinking about what are the things that are driving the way people spend money or save money, or what are the things that are driving how they act at work or their plans for the future, and that are more generalizable, like I was saying earlier. You kind of need to broaden out. Another thing that they'll do is, that folks will do and make a mistake with it, is they will sit on the data. They'll have the data, they'll do a survey, they'll spend a couple months kind of thinking about how they should package it, and then soon, what do you know, it's not really relevant anymore. It's like that was a story that was happening this spring, and now it's fall. So that can be a reason. Or, maybe they didn't do a good job collecting the data. They emailed 25 customers and tried to just use percentages, or they didn't use any sort of sampling.
Right. If you're analyzing your own data, you do need to have a representative data set for a particular vertical or company size or what have you. If you're still a very early stage, you've got a couple of, pockets of information, but it's not representative of a bigger trend. And so there's not a lot you can really do with that. But I did like your point there. Hey, look, taking too long to analyze it and then sort of think about what your take is, because your competitors are doing this too, right? They can come along and come out with something very similar because they probably got similar production data that you do. Or, as you said, something can change and, okay, that was interesting, but now I'm on to the next topic. So you always bear that risk, and therefore speed of execution to get it out there as quickly as possible is really important.
Agreed.
I want to talk about surveys. So we've been talking about that. This was about mainly like, what is it that you know that nobody else knows that can illustrate a bigger trend? And I think that's a great way to do sort of consistent data storytelling. But hey, some companies, they don't have the engineering time. They don't have the representative data. The data just, they're just not geared up for that kind of stuff. Maybe it's very confidential and they don't want to share it. But they can still do data storytelling as an avenue for coverage by doing primary research surveys, right? What do people think? That could be particular job titles. It could be omnibus things about people on the street. Now, surveys were hot in PR a few years ago, and every company was doing it. And some of the surveys really got down to being a couple of hundred people and not really representative. So it went away. Everyone was doing it, got a bit sort of tired. They've sort of come back now, I think. Is that what you're seeing?
I think the right ones are coming back, right? Sort of when there was this new group of tools for the first time that allowed you to collect these surveys on your own. Prior, it had been sort of difficult to do it, in any way, let alone using the wrong customer lists or so on and so forth, the wrong ways that people might do it now. I think that's sort of shaken out a little bit. The media have gone, okay, well, we kind of know no matter how you get there, it's hard to get to 1,000, right? So I'll listen if I hear that there's 1,000 respondents to your survey. And I think folks have also learned some of the lessons we've talked about, right? They're not running surveys about, hey, don't you wish you really had a product like ours? 78% say yes, right? Like, there's a lot less of those attempts and more of a realization, and sort of more companies are going after sort of feelings and feelings at work, right? Like, the future of work is really on everyone's mind after COVID, and you cannot necessarily figure out how people are feeling from looking at the clicks, right? Like, you can make some guesses, if you're, I'm sure somebody on our digital team will say, actually.
Sentiment analysis for this.
Right. But really, going back to primary research, we're asking better questions about work life and about, intentions. And I think people are more willing to share that than they were necessarily in business 20 years ago. It was more of I'm not telling you any of our plans. This is a top secret corporation that I'm working for. So I do think work culture has changed in the sense that I think you can get more of an insight into how people work and how they plan to work.
But do I need to use like an official panel company, Ipsos, a YouGov, which, they have their own panels. They add a lot of credibility. They can maybe help with even the survey creation so that you're asking the right questions in the right way, or that costs money because they're delivering that service. Do I need to do that as a startup? Should we just lean towards it and fight for that budget because the value is there? What do you think?
I think for most startups, it just depends on where you are in your journey, right? And where your marketing budget is. There's ways to do it right on your own, but you have to commit to collecting that data, even that survey data, in a way that, like you said, is a representative sample, where you're not just, limiting it only to, your happy customers, for example. And I also think that you can start smaller, right? It doesn't have to be a giant lift. One thing that, I think companies maybe have an advantage of with is in their customer sets, there are people who care about things besides their products and how well they work. And in those customer sets, the affinities are broad and you can get insight into a lot of different areas. And specifically, you can get direct quotes that you can use within your research to illustrate trends. So, maybe on its own, a survey of 250 customers might not be that interesting to media, but with a bunch of quotations that are illustrative, that are qualitative, that go along with that quantitative data, if you have that to accompany with it, that's something that is very authentic, and it can be an asset that even those big survey and research firms can't necessarily equal within your particular niche. But yeah, on the whole, I'd say the answer is no. You don't have to limit it to the big research firms. But I will also say that, like we were talking about earlier, you can't just create a big bag of data and throw it over to the journalists. You need some communications team, some marketing team to help you kind of sort out those insights, figure out what's relevant to which audiences. Your customers and the media, there is an overlap of what they care about, but that overlap isn't everything. The things that your customers might be interested in that might help you with your content for your website may not be the same things that a journalist might ask you more about on a pitch.
I think that's really important. A lot of companies are going to do primary research into their customers for their product marketing to see which features they should build and get sort of opinions about themselves. You can't use that necessarily for reporters because it becomes too self-serving. Should we be thinking about the stories that we want to find? We're thinking about headlines and then finding the data to back it up. I sometimes find I think about these questions and I think if they answer it this way, I've got this story. And if they answer it the way I don't want them to answer it, or I don't perceive as my answer, I've still got a story, right? Because sometimes you can kind of go out and the data can come back and they're like, okay, people answered it not in the way, the cards didn't fall the way I wanted, and I've got nothing. So is it best to think about the headlines in advance? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and something that those research firms aren't necessarily as concerned about, right? They're just trying to do it the most scientifically defensible and professional way for gathering the data. They'll often choose some wordings that don't seem intuitive because they want to make sure it's legally clear even. They're not necessarily thinking about how will this be used, right? That's not their job. We have to think about how will that be used in advance. So you're right. Asking questions that both sets of answers are interesting is key. So, okay, let's say we're asking about inflation right now, something related to inflation, since everybody's talking about it and its effect, or interest rates and all that kind of stuff. If we ask one that is, we expect to get, yes, inflation is really bothering me, we have to realize we're going to be competing with a lot of other indicators that inflation is really bothering. Now, if we ask a question that might elicit a different answer, where the question is, well, I'm not planning on changing my spending. Are you planning on changing your spending plans next year? Right? And the answer might be, no, I'm not. Right? Well, that sounds counterintuitive and it becomes more interesting. And so, asking a question that can be interesting both ways, I think is important.
Right. So you've got to be able to pick a question that can tell a story either way. And I think you make an important point. The goals of a survey company are to get the most statistically accurate data from the poll. The outcome, the results from that are the outcome for you, but it's an input for the PR program. We're trying to get a story that might be counterintuitive. And so those goals can sometimes be misaligned. And that's, I think, what can lead to a survey where you just go out and prove, hey, guess what? People really love watching TV and playing video games, and they're going to keep doing that. Okay, there's no trend there, and you've just proven something that's completely obvious, and that's where people spend their time. Hey, kids like looking at TikTok. Yes, they do. There's no trend in that. It's a surprise to no one. But the survey company would come back and go, oh, yeah, we've proven that kids like TikTok. Okay.
Right. And I fixed that survey by comparing how much they like TikTok with something silly. Like, do you like TikTok better or ice cream? Right. And then suddenly we have something to work with, right? Even though we know that everyone likes both of those things.
Yeah. So in the ebook that you've written here, there is a process for startups to go through, and I don't expect you to kind of unpack it because in full, but it's Data Go under the acronym. And can you just quickly summarize what those steps are? And if people want to read it, they can download the full ebook.
Yes, you'll have to, accept my apologies for a little bit of a stretched acronym, but Data Go. Okay, here we go. So D stands for determine your goals, right? Figure out, why are we doing this? Are we doing this to get media? Are we doing this so that people understand better a little bit of who we are in the market? Are we doing this to understand our audience better, right? That's a perfectly good reason to do research. So that was the D. A is for aggregate your data assets. Get them all together, right? Figure out, what do you have to work with? Is it stuff arising from the way that you do business? Are you going to have to run a survey? So on and so forth, right? Okay, then the next one is T. Team up with the right data partners. So if you are going to bring something from your platform, you're going to need to work with a lot of folks internally at your client in order to figure out, within the company, in order to figure out, where do we get the data from? How do we get it in a format that we can use it? Who pulls that? Can they do this? Do they have time for it? All that kind of stuff. And talk to them about, what your process will be to get the data. And even if that is a outside research partner. And make sure you're asking the right questions, right? Talked about that a little bit earlier. Finding something, thinking about the outcome in advance, finding a topic that will be interesting regardless of, the direction of the answer, and making sure that is encapsulated within either your survey or even the data queries that you're asking, right? Like, okay, do people care so much about people's average income, or do they care more about how their income has changed over the past year? And then G, glean the narrative. This is where we're stretching that acronym. Get the story. What are you actually getting out of this data? What is it telling us about the way people work, the way they plan on spending money, how they're saving money, how they feel about their coworkers, so on and so forth. And then finally, the O, operationalize it. Like, get it out there, right? Make sure that you're putting it into a format, whether that's a quick data pitch or a longer form press release or a blog post or full-on report. Make sure you're getting it out there in a way that your audiences can use it. So that's the 6-step plan.
It's a great plan. It's a great approach, despite the G for glean. But I think we'll give you a pass on that. What other advice would you give to startups when it comes to data storytelling?
I'd say from the beginning, make sure you have a sort of a company spokesperson in mind that becomes your go-to narrator for your data storytelling. It could be multiple spokespeople if you have those kinds of resources, but make sure that that's in advance, that they are helping to kind of understand that data with you, that they believe in the narrative that you're painting, and that they're fluent in it, so that when they get on the phone to talk to the journalist because you've pitched them in, that they can do more than just report the numbers, but put it in perspective, and they've thought about, what does this mean and how should this be interpreted?
I think that's brilliant. So our next section is called Smart People, Dumb Questions. Are you up for that?
Sure, let's do it. I don't know if I qualify, but
You absolutely do qualify for this. Let me be clear about that. What is your most irrational superstition?
My most irrational superstition. Okay, so when I cannot catch fish when I'm fishing, I pour some root beer, if that's available to me, or another soda into the water. It's a tradition that my son started, and it nearly always catches fish for us within a short period of time.
Oh, really?
I don't know why, but it's totally superstitious, homegrown superstition.
Who is the worst roommate that you ever had?
Oh man, people are going to listen to this. So I had a roommate in college who considered me the worst roommate that he ever had, and we just sort of got into a worst roommate war, right? Where one of us was inconsiderate. It might have been me first, but then the other person kind of just like took it up to the next level, and I think it might have culminated with a hidden pizza in someone's room for the semester. Yeah.
That sounds bad. I had a roommate who was in the Territorial Army, and he came back drunkenly one night and stabbed his bayonet through the wall between our rooms.
Oh.
So I woke up to a bayonet coming through the wall. Oh, that was interesting.
Yes. I'm glad that your bed was positioned in the right way. Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of another person who mistook my computer for the restroom in the middle of the night. That was also but he otherwise a great roommate.
Otherwise a great person, just slightly misdirected. What is your favorite Thanksgiving meal?
Oh, this will be very controversial. So I like cooking the meal. I don't really enjoy turkey very much. I don't know why it's become this big thing. Like, I prefer comfort food on Thanksgiving, right? So I'm originally from Chicago. So if I can get some deep dish pizza on Thanksgiving, which I have arranged on a couple Thanksgivings. Now, my wife is huge fan of Thanksgiving, huge fan of all the trimmings, and she hates this idea. So I haven't had this in years, but it was deep dish Chicago pizza on
deep dish on the side there.
Very
nice. Very nice. I must admit that I do think Thanksgiving is one of the best holidays and an amazing American tradition. Just simple, getting family and friends together.
Turkey, though, Morgan, I guess.
I like turkey. It's kind of like a dry run for the holidays for me, but I don't like, sweet potato with marshmallows on, or the green beans in a can of mushrooms.
Right.
What's going on with that? That's got no place.
Well, I'll leave it to the American food versus British food conversation. I'll leave that till I'm not going to talk about breakfast in the UK and all that combination of.
You mean it's unbeatable English breakfast? Okay. All right, very good. Let's move on to our next section, which we call Fired Up 5, and this is our quick fire round. What do you wish you'd known before you got into PR?
That nobody who knows what they're doing really has known it for very long, nor will they necessarily know more than you for very long.
Wow, that's a good one, particularly now in times of AI. What is the best career advice you've ever been given?
Pick your boss. It's more important than your job. See, I'm on a podcast with my boss audience.
You are great at that, let me say. What is the tool or gadget that you've recently started using and it can't be ChatGPT?
I had a hard time because I felt like that's a really unfair thing. Like, does that mean I can't talk about Bard either? Or, am I
different LLMs? You might.
I mean, how about Midjourney? Like, Midjourney is like, it's like daydreaming. It's an amazing thing. Now, is it super useful? Is it a tool? No, it's a gadget. It's still a gadget.
It is a great tool. What's the thing that you have learned in the last year?
I would say that PR is still about patience.
That's dead right. What's the PR tactic that most people are overlooking?
I think brands are avoiding this right now. It's risky, but I think brands should be telling us how things should be more. It's difficult in a more sort of controversial environment, but we need leadership from brands. And, I think brands like Patagonia that have gone ahead and made choices and gone in the direction of what their ideals are, have led the way in their industries for practices as a result, right? You see other brands following suit in the way that they behave. Like it's not just a PR tactic. It's I think communicating the way things should be is what brand leadership is.
I think that's good, as long as the topic is an area that matters to the company and to your audience, and on which you have some credibility.
Yeah.
Not just sort of spouting out opinions about every virtue signaling topic that might alienate some of your users. We've seen countless examples of that, but something that is core, that your brand is going to stick to, and you're not just going to have this opinion today and change it tomorrow, I think is critical. And Patagonia is a great example of that. I mean, he sold the business in order to further it. So I think that's a classic example.
Yeah. And, just to put a final point on that, it doesn't have to be about a big thing like climate change, right? It can simply be about, this is the way the industry should be doing business. And, it can be very specific, but a lot of thought leadership tends to be thought fellowship. And I want brands to actually lead.
Agreed. So our very own Ian Lipner, thanks for being on Fired Up again and talking to us about data storytelling. If people want to reach you, where can they get in contact?
Oh, you can always find me on LinkedIn. And of course, here at Firebrand, Ian L at firebrand.marketing. I should say IANL at firebrand.marketing.
And the new ebook is out today, How to Stand Out with Data, and available on our website. And we will make it available in our Fired Up freebies download as well. Thanks again for being on today. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Ian. And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, enjoy your turkey.
Will do. Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/fired up freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.